The heat of the teacup in my hand was the first shock, a searing brand of life that jolted me back into a body I thought had long since frozen. The memory was a phantom pain, sharper than any winter wind. The gnawing emptiness in my own belly, the terrifying lightness of my son Leo in my arms, his breathing growing shallower as the snow piled around us. And the final grotesque image seared behind my eyelids. My husband David Chin and his sister-in-law Clara cozy on the heated Kong, their fingers slick as they counted the last of my family's money. And now I was here, standing in the main hall of my parents' home, the very day David had come to formally propose. The script was sickeningly familiar. "Elena," David said, his voice a practiced melody of earnest sacrifice. He stood before me, the picture of a responsible, burdened man. "You have to understand, I must shoulder 2 households now. My brother is gone. Clara is a widow left alone with her child. I can't just abandon them." His words were a key twisting in the lock of my memory. It was believing that exact face, that very plea that had sealed my fate. I had agreed, swallowed my misgivings, and walked willingly into a life of slow starvation and emotional neglect, ending in a snowy ditch. The porcelain of the teacup was almost unbearably hot against my palm. I looked at David, at his carefully arranged mask of sorrow and duty, and I saw the man who had watched me walk out into the cold with his son and had not lifted a finger. The room held its breath. My father's brow was furrowed with concern, my mother's eyes pleading for me to be reasonable, to accept this good match. I didn't speak. I simply let my fingers go slack. The teacup hit the stone floor with a sound like a gunshot, shattering into a dozen jagged pieces. Hot tea splashed across David's expensive trousers, and he leaped back with a sharp, undignified yelp. The silence that followed was absolute, then shattered by a collective, horrified gasp. "David Chin," I said, my voice cold and clear, cutting through the murmurs. "Do you take me for a fool?" His mask slipped, revealing a flash of startled fury before he could school his features. "Elena, what is the meaning of this? If you are in love with Clara, just say it," I continued, each word a hammer blow. "Don't use taking on 2 households as a cover for your shame. You want my family's support, my dowry, and the freedom to play the hero while keeping your beloved close. I will not be the fool a second time." "A second time?" he sputtered, confused by my phrasing but enraged by my accusation. My father found his voice. "Elena, apologize at once." But I was done apologizing for existing. I seized the teapot from the table. "Get out," I said to David, my gaze unwavering. "If you don't get out of my house this instant, I will pour this entire pot on your face." He stumbled back, genuine fear in his eyes now. The crowd of relatives and neighbors gathered outside our door erupted into a cacophony of whispers and shouts as he retreated in disgrace. "The girl has lost her mind. David Chin is such a good catch. So what if he has to care for his brother's family? That's responsibility." I clenched my fists, my nails biting into my palms. Responsibility? Where was this chorus of virtue when Leo and I were starving to death? Where was their concept of responsibility then? The anger was a living thing in my chest, threatening to choke me. I turned away from the staring eyes, my whole body trembling with the aftershock of my rebellion. I had torn up the script of my life, but I had no idea what came next. The future was a terrifying blank page. Suddenly, a head popped up over the courtyard wall. A familiar, grinning face, topped with unruly dark hair. The boy I had quarreled and fought with since we were children. He pushed himself up and vaulted down into the courtyard with a fluid, easy motion. In his hand he carried a bundle wrapped in oiled paper. He looked at the shattered teacup on the floor, then at my furious, tear-streaked face, and a slow, roguish smile spread across his lips. "So," he said, his voice a low rumble that was somehow both teasing and comforting. "Smash the cup. I take it that was the signal for the rebellion." He tossed the bundle to me. I caught it on instinct. It was warm. "They're just plain buns," he said with a shrug. "Eat them while they're hot." The simple kindness, the stark contrast to David's calculated performance, broke something inside me. My nose burned and hot tears spilled over, tracing paths through the dust on my cheeks. In my past life, the last thing I had eaten before dying was the cold, hard bun Kai had secretly left on my windowsill. He had been my only lifeline and I had been too proud, too blind to see it. "Who wants your buns?" I scolded, my voice thick with tears, even as my hands clutched the package tightly to my chest. If you don't, I'll feed them to the dog, he teased, making a grab for them. You dare. I snapped, shielding the buns with one arm and aiming a half-hearted kick at his shin. He dodged nimbly, laughing. It was a free, unburdened sound. What are you crying for? Where's that fire you had when you smashed the cup? I wiped my face angrily with my sleeve, then unwrapped the bundle. I bit into a bun, the simple, warm flavor a balm to my ravaged soul. I chewed, swallowed, and then suddenly raised my head to look at him. The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. Kai, when you said you'd marry me, does that still count? He froze. The laughter died on his lips, and for 3 long seconds he just stared at me, his dark eyes searching mine. Then a slow, incredulous smile returned. Elena, he said, tilting his head. Are you serious? You know I'm much poorer than David Chin. So what if you're poor? I took another fierce bite of the bun. In my last life I married a rich man and still froze to death in the snow. The moment the words left my mouth I regretted them. It was too much, too strange. His smile faded and his gaze turned deeper, more intense. He didn't press me though. He just reached out, his calloused thumb gently wiping a spot of grease from the corner of my mouth. All right, he said, his voice soft but firm. Tomorrow. I'll come to propose. He turned and left the way he came, scaling the wall with an easy strength and disappearing from view. I stood alone in the courtyard, the warmth of the bun in my stomach and the ghost of his touch on my skin. The blank page of my future was no longer terrifying. For the first time it held a promise. The next day the village exploded again. The news spread like wildfire, fanned by scandalized whispers and self-righteous outrage. She's truly insane. Passing up David Chin for that pauper Kai? A soldier? He has nothing but the clothes on his back. Did you see her humiliate David in public? A shrew like that deserves a life of poverty. I heard it all, a constant buzzing static of judgment as I carried my laundry basket down to the river. In my previous life these whispers would have crushed me. I would have bent my head, swallowed my shame and tried to make myself smaller. But that Elena was dead, frozen in the snow. This one had a fire in her belly, stoked by the memory of starvation. I no longer cared for their pointing fingers or their harsh words. Swallowing my anger had only earned me a death in the cold. In this life I was determined to live on my own terms, even if it meant being the village madwoman. Suddenly, a basin of dirty, soapy water splashed down at my feet, soaking my shoes and the hem of my trousers. I looked up to see Auntie Liang standing there, her hands on her hips, a cold, triumphant smirk on her face. Watch where you're going, she sneered, her voice dripping with false concern. My fists clenched. The laundry basket felt heavy in my hands. I was about to snap back, to unleash the torrent of fury I felt, when a lazy, mocking voice cut through the tension from behind me. Auntie Liang, the voice drawled. Should I tell everyone what I saw your son doing, sneaking peeks into the women's bathhouse last week? I hadn't even noticed Kai's approach. He stood there now, swinging a military canteen in his hand, his expression one of pure, unadulterated insolence. Auntie Liang's face went from smug to ashen in an instant. She sputtered, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Without another word, she spun on her heel and scurried away, the crowd of women at the riverbank tittering behind their hands. Coward, Kai muttered, raising a brow. Then he turned that brilliant, infuriating grin on me. Come on. The current's strong today. I'll carry you across. Before I could process the offer, let alone refuse it, he had crouched down in front of me, his broad back presented like an invitation. Who needs you to carry me? I shot back, my ears burning with a sudden, inexplicable heat. He glanced back over his shoulder, his eyes so bright and challenging they almost scared me. Hurry up. Otherwise, I'll just scoop you up myself. Grinding my teeth, I reluctantly climbed onto his back. My arms went around his neck and he hooked his under my knees, standing up with an easy strength that made my breath catch. He was solid and warm, a wall of muscle and stability. Then, without warning, he leapt forward, landing with a splash in the shallow part of the river. I gasped and clutched his neck tighter, a startled laugh escaping my lips. Listen up, everyone. Kai shouted, his voice carrying easily across the water to the gossiping crowd on the opposite bank. Elena is my childhood sweetheart. We're getting married. Anyone got a problem with that? He jostled me playfully on his back. Anyone spreading gossip will have to answer to me. I climb her wall at midnight to check. The crowd of nosy uncles and aunts went dead silent, their eyes wide. A few of the younger ones struggled to hide their smiles. I laughed, the sound foreign and joyful to my own ears, and gave him a playful punch on the shoulder. You're impossible. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Kai popped up at my window again. He waved a wrinkled piece of paper, his expression a mixture of bravado and nervousness. Here, he said, thrusting it at me. A marriage agreement. I took it, unfolding it carefully. The paper was crammed with his crooked, energetic handwriting. Clause 1. All wages turned into wife. Clause 2. If we fight, I must coax my wife. Clause 3. I must make my wife smile every day. Clause 4. Every day I must buy my wife pork buns. Signed Kai. I fought back a smile, my finger tracing the words. Then I jabbed my finger at the last tiny line scribbled at the very bottom. Final interpretation belongs to Kai. And what, I asked, looking up at him, does that mean? His ears turned a spectacular shade of scarlet. He didn't answer. Instead, he spun around and bolted into the gathering dusk, leaving me clutching the paper and shaking my head. But as I watched him go, I heard his muttered words float back on the evening breeze. It means one day I'll make it real. A warmth that had nothing to do with the summer evenings spread through my chest. I clutched that so-called marriage agreement, a tangible promise in a world that had once offered me only betrayal. Later, as I walked back from the well, a shadow lunged out from behind the old locust tree at the village entrance and grabbed my wrist. The stink of alcohol clung to him like a shroud. David. His eyes were bloodshot, his face a mask of desperation and rage. Elena, he slurred, his grip tightening like a vice. You came back too, didn't you? My blood ran cold. He knew. This time I swear I'll never fail you again, he pleaded, his voice trembling. Let me make it right. Let go of me, I said, yanking my arm, but he was too strong. I know you came back too, he insisted, his breath hot and foul on my face. Last time was my mistake. This time it will be different. I forced a sneer, masking the terror his words ignited. I don't understand a word you're saying, Mr. Chin. Aren't you supposed to be taking care of Clara? Blocking me in the middle of the night. What do you think you're doing? Sweat broke out on his forehead. Caring for Clara is temporary. Once the family property is divided, I'll be done with her. Then it will be just us. Planning that far ahead before I've even married in? I mocked, my heart hammering against my ribs. You claim taking on 2 households was to honor your brother, but we both know what you really want. His face darkened and he raised his hand as if to strike me. I flinched, bracing for the blow, when the sharp, clear ring of a bicycle bell cut through the night. Kai rolled to a stop, 1 foot on the ground, 2 pounds of fresh pork hanging from his handlebars. In the moonlight, his eyes narrowed to dangerous slits as he took in the scene. So, Mr. Chin, he said, his voice deceptively calm. Dragging my wife out for a midnight tragedy play? I seized the chance to wrench my arm free and darted to Kai's side. He yanked me behind him in one fluid, protective motion. Get lost, Kai growled, the simple words laced with more threat than any shout. Touch her again and I'll make sure your whole family starves without the commune's grain. David staggered back, then suddenly stared at me with a twisted, ugly laugh. You think Kai is some saint? You think he's pure? He has his own secrets. Bang. Kai's fist smashed into the tree trunk right next to David's ear, the impact shaking the branches and sending a shower of leaves down onto his shoulders. Say one more word. Kai leaned down, his shadow engulfing David completely, his voice a low, deadly promise. And I'll send you to see your brother right now. David's face turned ashen with pure terror. He spun and ran, his footsteps clumsy and hurried in the dark. Kai watched him go, his body still coiled with tension. Then, in a movement so fast I barely registered it, he grabbed a long pole leaning against a nearby wall. In just a few strides he caught up to the fleeing David and swung the pole hard across his back. David shrieked, stumbling so badly he nearly toppled into the roadside ditch. Let that teach you to stay away from my woman. Kai roared after him. Harass her again and I'll break your legs. I stood frozen, only then realizing that my entire body was trembling. The confrontation, David's cryptic words, the violence. It had all happened so fast. Elena. Kai dropped the pole. It clattered on the stones. He took a few quick steps and stopped right in front of me. His voice, which had been a thunderous roar moments before, suddenly softened to a whisper. You're crying. Only then did I feel the cold tears on my cheeks. I hadn't even known I was crying. Who's crying? I turned my head away, embarrassed by my own vulnerability. But he caught my chin gently and pulled my face back towards his. He was glaring, but his touch was feather-light as his thumb brushed the tears from the corner of my eye. Clause 3 of the agreement, he said, his voice a low rumble. You have to smile every day. My nose stung and I almost cried again. The absurdity of it, the sheer stubborn kindness. In my last life I had cried until there were no tears left. In this one there was actually someone who refused to let me cry. I can't just smile on command, I sniffled, kicking his shin lightly. The way you swung that pole back there. You looked like you were beating a dog. What if you'd killed him? You scared me to death. He suddenly broke into a grin, showing off his white teeth. Then I'll go easy from now on. Without another word of warning, he bent down, slung me over his shoulder as if I weighed nothing, and started walking back towards my house. Put me down, Kai. I pounded on his back, but he just bounced me a little higher on purpose, making me gasp. David wasn't wrong about one thing, he said, his voice slightly muffled. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. What? His steps faltered for a moment and his voice dropped so low I could barely hear it. I really am no saint. The night wind seemed to fall silent, the world holding its breath. In the sudden quiet, I could hear the violent, rhythmic pounding of his heart. He shifted me higher on his shoulder and strode forward, his declaration hanging in the air between us. This life you're not getting away from me. Before dawn the next day, a frantic pounding on my window shattered my sleep. Elena. Wake up. Let's make money. With my hair sticking up like a bird's nest, I shoved the window open, only to nearly get a fried dough stick stuffed into my mouth. Kai vaulted inside, one hand braced on the windowsill, his army green satchel bulging ominously. What is this? I grumbled, pushing the greasy food away. He just grinned, rolling up my bedding with quick practiced moves that spoke of his military training. Startup funds, he declared, thrusting the bulging satchel at me. I pushed it open and found the bag stuffed with colorful ribbons, lace and scraps of beautiful cloth. My breath caught. I asked around. The textile mill sells waste scraps for 50 cents a pound. We can turn them into hair accessories and sell each for $3. His eyes were alight with a cunning I'd never associated with him. A spark ignited in my own chest. In my last life I had buried myself in farm work, blind to any opportunity beyond the soil. I never knew such a simple path existed. Hope, tangible and fierce, bloomed inside me. We spent the whole day at my small table, our heads bent together, fingers flying. We fashioned cloth roses, tied ribbons into delicate bows, and created hairpins that shimmered with simple beauty. It was the most purpose I'd felt since waking up in this new old life. The next morning we squatted at the busiest stall in the marketplace, our hair flowers displayed on a simple wooden board. For a glorious hour we sold a few, the jingle of coins in our tin box a sweet melody. Then the shadows fell over us. Who told you two you could sell here? 3 thugs swaggered over, their leader kicking over our board, scattering our careful work into the dirt. Paid protection fees yet? Rage, hot and immediate, surged in my throat. I was about to argue to defend our small piece of hope, but Kai pressed down on my hand, giving it a gentle warning squeeze. Don't be mad, brother, he said, his voice suddenly servile. He stood, offering them cigarettes with a placating smile. We're new here. We'll pack up right now. Once they swaggered away, counting the fee he'd slipped them, he immediately grabbed my hand and pulled me into the bustling crowd. What are you doing? I stumbled after him, my heart aching for our ruined flowers. Reporting the black market, he said, his eyes shining with excitement. Those thugs are in cahoots with Director Luo of the Public Security Office. A real name report nets a $50 reward. I skidded to a halt, pulling him back. You already knew they'd come stir up trouble. He flashed me that rogue's grin, his sharp canine tooth gleaming. Otherwise, how could we catch a big fish? In the end we really did get the reward. The thugs were arrested and we walked away with more money than we would have made in a week of selling hair flowers. On the way back to town, I was so giddy with the success of our scheme that I skipped without watching my step, twisting my ankle in a pothole. I let out a sharp cry of pain. Without a word, Kai crouched down, his warm, calloused palm wrapping gently around my ankle. "Does it hurt?" he murmured, his voice low. His thumb began to press slow, firm circles into the swelling. "We'll rub it with medicinal wine when we get back." His voice was a soft blur in my ears. His fingertips, rough and gentle at once, slid up along my ankle, stopping at the edge of my long skirt. The bustle of the street seemed to vanish, the world narrowing to the point where his skin met mine, to the sound of his rough breathing brushing against my calf. My own breath hitched. "Kai," I said, my voice unsteady. I kicked him lightly with my good foot. "Where exactly are you touching?" He jerked his hand back as if burned, the tips of his ears blazing scarlet. "Your ankle's swollen. You need good circulation," he mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. The very next day, emboldened by our success, we set up a new stall with a fresh batch of accessories. But this time it was officials from the Commerce Bureau who arrived, their faces stern. "Where's your business license?" One of them, wearing a shiny badge, kicked over our crate of goods. Kai yanked me behind him, his posture shifting from merchant to soldier in an instant. "Comrade, we are just..." The man cut him off, shaking out a piece of paper. "We have a real name report here accusing you of illegal business." At the bottom, the signature stood out clearly, a jagged scrawl I would recognize anywhere. "Davidson." My blood ran cold. Kai suddenly leaned down to my ear. "Don't worry," he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. I could only watch, helpless and terrified, as they shoved him onto the back of a three-wheeled motorcycle. Right before they took him away, trapped and in cuffs, he even had the audacity to wink at me. That night, the silence in my house was suffocating. I jumped at every sound, clutching the marriage agreement he'd given me like a talisman. Then my wooden door banged open. "Elena Shaw." David staggered in, reeking of alcohol. "Kai's not coming back tonight," he slurred, his eyes glinting with triumph in the lamplight. "Let's see who can protect you now." Frightened, I bolted upright in bed, grabbed the broom and swung it straight at his head. He caught my wrist easily, his grip bruising, and forced my knees apart with his own. "What? You still want to hit me?" He tore at my nightclothes with one hand, his panting breath foul in my face. "Stop pretending you're so pure. You think being reborn changes anything? Tonight I'll make it official. Once you're carrying my child, let's see where you think you can run." I fought, I screamed, but he was too strong. The horrors of my past life were crashing into my present, the walls closing in. This was it. Despite everything, I had failed. Bang. A shadow flew in through the open window, a blur of motion that resolved into Kai. He kicked David hard, sending him crashing into the wall with a sickening thud. In the dim light, Kai yanked his collar open, revealing the green uniform underneath. He slapped a piece of official paper down on the table. The army approved our marriage report. His lip was bruised and bleeding, but his eyes shone with a frightening, triumphant brilliance. "Sign it, Elena." My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the pen, but I scrawled my name next to his. Kai immediately wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. "Touch her again," he said to a dazed David, his voice dropping to a deadly calm, "and it's destruction of a military marriage. You know what that means." David's face went ashen. He lunged at me, snarling. "You think this changes anything?" I rose on my toes, steadying myself against Ryan. His whole body stiffened for a second before his hand clamped the back of my head, pulling me into a deep, claiming kiss. It was not gentle. It was desperate, possessive, and filled with 2 lifetimes of pent-up longing. David roared and shoved Ryan aside. I held up the marriage report, my voice steady now, laced with a victory I could finally taste. "See this?" I laughed at him, the sound wild and free. "This is what making it official really looks like." David suddenly burst into hysterical laughter. "Elena Shaw, you think this means you can start over? I'll tell you. We both came back. That means it's fate." "You're talking nonsense." I cut him off coldly, my heart hammering. "Rebirth." Kai's expression darkened, dangerous as a gathering storm. I clutched his hand tight. Michael kept ranting, his eyes wild. "I know you'll get pregnant at this time. I know." Kai's fist smashed into his face. Blood spurted from David's nose. Rebirth. Kai hauled him up by the collar. Then do you remember how many vile things you did last time? David's pupils shrank in terror. Kai punched him again. Seems like you haven't improved at all in this life either. He rammed his elbow into David's chest, folding him like a shrimp, then dragged him to the door and kicked him out into the night. He spun back, his chest heaving, and pulled me into his arms. His heartbeat pounded like a frantic drum against my ear, a rhythm of fear, rage, and relief. I chuckled softly against his chest, the adrenaline making me lightheaded. So mad, huh? He said he'd hurt you. Ryan's voice was raw, still shaking with a violence he'd barely contained. Even if I had to live again 100 times, I'd kill him every time. He held me until my trembling stopped, until the only sound was our synchronized breathing in the quiet room. We were married, and the war for our future had just begun. The gossip the next day was a torrent, but it washed over me. I was too busy stirring a giant pot, the air thick with the scent of garlic, ginger, and a dozen secret spices. I was reworking my family's ancestral chili sauce recipe. It was something I could control, something that was purely mine. Kai slipped a milk candy into my hand as I scowled at the whispering women at the well. Don't get mad, he said with a lazy smile. The real show is still ahead. Sure enough, that afternoon the loudspeaker at the village entrance crackled to life. The party secretary's voice boomed across the fields. Attention all members. Evidence has been found proving David Chin embezzled the production team's grain. After investigation, last fall's shortage of 500 pounds of wheat. I jerked my head toward Kai. He was squatting by the wall, cracking melon seeds, and he winked at me. The crowd exploded. David Chin. Last year my mother's body swelled from hunger, and it was you who stole the grain, someone shouted. All my family got were rotten sweet potatoes. Beat him. I rushed along with the furious tide of villagers to David's courtyard. We found him cornered against a wall, his face already bleeding from a well-aimed stone. Just as the mob's anger was about to consume him, Clara, his sister-in-law, stumbled out from the house. Her hair was in disarray, her clothes torn. She grabbed his collar and screamed, her voice cracking with a pain that felt terrifyingly real. You're no man at all. The crowd fell silent, stunned. Tears streamed down her face. She held out her arms, showing dark, ugly bruises. You talk about taking care of 2 households. You can't even perform in bed. You're useless. A worm. David's face drained of all color. He raised his hand to strike her, but Kai darted forward, seizing his wrist in a grip of iron. You hit a woman and call yourself a man? Kai's voice was loud and clear, a judgment for all to hear. David's eyes, wild and desperate, locked onto Kai. You set me up. You schemed against me. Kai stepped forward, pulling a stack of yellowed account papers from his pocket. David Chin, these embezzlement records are in your own handwriting. He let the sheets scatter across the ground. The rustling paper was the only sound before the storm broke. The villagers' eyes turned blood red. A clod of dirt was hurled, then rotten vegetables, then reeking eggs. All of it pelted David, covering him in the filth of his own deeds. Kai pulled me away from the enraged mob, his warm palm covering my ears, shielding me from the worst of the curses. Don't listen. Don't look, he whispered, his voice a sanctuary. In this life we only pay attention to good things. 3 days later, I hung a wooden sign reading Elena's Spicy Pepper Shop on the front of my old house. At dawn, Kai insisted on pedaling his tricycle to the county to buy supplies in a biting cold wind. You'll freeze to death, I scolded, trying to pull him back toward the warmth of the house. But as my hand touched his forehead, I recoiled. You're burning up. He was groggy, his skin slick with feverish sweat. He caught my wrist, his grip weak but urgent. Elena, he mumbled, his eyes glazed. Don't be afraid of the cold. I found you this time. A tremor, violent and profound, shot through me. In my past life, right before my child and I froze to death, I had sobbed those exact words into the unfeeling snow. So cold. My hands shook as I pried open his tightly clenched fist. Kai, I whispered, my voice trembling. Did you come back too? His face was burning hot, but suddenly his eyes opened. The ever-present teasing smile was gone, replaced by a raw, unguarded gaze that was wet with unshed tears. as if it had crossed through 2 lifetimes of blizzards just to find me. That bun on your windowsill. His voice was hoarse, cracked with emotion. I should have come back sooner. My tears spilled instantly, hot and freeing. You bastard. I cupped his blazing face in my hands. Why didn't you say you'd been reborn earlier? Did you enjoy watching me struggle with David? He suddenly dragged me down onto the bed with him, his feverish body enveloping mine, his breath scalding against my ear. I was afraid, he confessed, his voice a raw whisper. I was afraid if you knew I remembered all those miserable things, you'd refuse to marry me. I was afraid you still liked David. More than that, I was afraid you hated me for not protecting you last time. The last of my walls crumbled to dust. Now you know, I thought. I bit his neck, not hard but enough to make a point. Add one more clause to that agreement, I whispered. In this life, if you dare push me toward an early death, try it. He chuckled low through his fever, his arms squeezing me until it hurt. Yes, ma'am. After he recovered, neither of us brought up rebirth again. It hung between us, a shared, painful secret that now bound us tighter than any vow. I kept reworking the chili sauce, and finally one day I simmered a pot so fragrant, so perfectly balanced between fire and flavor, that Kai jumped with joy. I held up a ladle of the glistening, blood-red sauce. This flavor, I declared, will sell all the way to the provincial capital. Kai, sweating buckets from the spice, still grinned, his eyes watering. It's perfect. Tomorrow I'm going to the credit union for a loan. We'll turn the backyard into a workshop. On the day we started our expansion, David stirred up trouble again. Relying on his father's position as village head, he forced the purchase price of peppers down to 3 cents a pound. The villagers, bitter but cowed, avoided my eyes as I passed. Elena, Uncle Wong finally edged over, looking ashamed. I'll sell you my peppers if you pay 5 cents. Before I could answer, Kai slapped down the cash on the spot. Deal. The crowd buzzed. Before dawn the next day, our courtyard door thudded under heavy knocks. Auntie Zhang squeezed in with 2 burlap sacks. Buy mine first. That stingy bastard only offered 3 cents. Then came Uncle Xiao, then Auntie Lu, then the rest of the village. Soon, a line of handcarts piled with bright red peppers stretched all the way to the village entrance. David stood outside the production team office, his face black as the bottom of a pot. You're undermining the village's unified purchasing policy, he shouted. Uncle Wong spat straight at his feet. It's my choice who I sell to. What law am I breaking? Soon my courtyard was a mountain of crimson. Kai squatted under the eaves, tallying accounts, when he suddenly pulled over my hand, stained red from sorting chilies. Does it hurt? He asked softly. Only then did I notice the skin had split open from the constant work. I sucked in a sharp breath. A little. He lowered his head, wrapped my fingertip carefully with his clean handkerchief and muttered, then this batch of chili sauce should be called Bleeding Heart. A few days later, after we collected the last cartload from a neighboring village, we took a shortcut home through the back mountain. A woman's scream, sharp and terrified, ripped through the quiet air. It was Clara. Kai yanked me behind him into the tall grass. We saw her, cornered against a rocky outcrop by a burly man with a scarred face. He was yanking at her arm. You've already given me a son, the man growled. What are you still pretending to be virtuous for? Get off your high horse. Clara suddenly whipped a pair of scissors from within her clothes. Touch my son and see what happens. A flash of steel. The man clutched his stomach, a look of shock on his face as he collapsed to his knees. Kai and I rushed out, but at the same moment, David burst from behind the trees. Instead of helping her, he kicked Clara to the ground. Whore, he screamed. I married 2 households just to keep the Chin bloodline, and you dared betray me. Blood streamed down Clara's face as she shielded her cowering child. And you call yourself a man? She spat, her voice trembling with a hatred that mirrored my own. Your brother is gone, yet you do such shameful things to me. You're the monster. David's face contorted with pure rage. He snatched the scissors from her hand and without a moment's hesitation, drove them straight into her chest. The child's scream of terror was a sound that would haunt me forever. He struck again, wild and merciless. Then he lifted his head. His crazed eyes landed on us. It's all your fault, he hissed, the bloody scissors glinting in his hand. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have lost everything. Run. Kai shoved me behind him. David charged, the scissors aimed at Kai's heart. Kai dodged sideways, seized an axe from a nearby firewood stack and swung it up. David chin. Kai's voice was a thunderclap. You dare turn your violence on a woman? The axe crashed down not on David but onto the hand holding the scissors, the steel blade splitting it open with a sickening crunch. David dropped to his knees, howling in agony but still spitting curses. It's all because of you. Clutching Kai's shirt, I glared at the wretched man on the ground. The one who ruined everything, I said, my voice cold and clear, has always been you. David burst into crazed laughter, pointing at Clara's lifeless body. See? This is what happens to anyone who goes against me. His eyes, glazed with madness, fixed on Kai. You came back too, didn't you? You picked up the broken shoes I didn't want in 2 lifetimes. You think being reborn makes you a hero. Kai's axe whistled past his ear, embedding itself deep in the tree trunk behind him with a solid thunk. Say one more word, Kai's voice was deathly quiet, and I'll make sure you die worse than you did last time. The sound of rushing footsteps echoed in the distance. Villagers coming to investigate the screams. David glared at us one last time, a promise of unfinished hatred in his eyes, before clutching his ruined hand and bolting into the dense cornfields. It's over, Kai whispered, turning and clutching me tightly. His whole body was shaking. This time I protected you. My fingers trembled as I gripped his collar. Are you insane? I choked out. If that blade had been an inch closer. It wouldn't have, he said, cupping my face. His cheek was scratched, but his gaze was steady, certain. I calculated the angle. I raised my hand to swat him, but he caught my wrist. Elena. He leaned close, his breath hot against my ear, his voice dropping to an intense whisper. Tomorrow. Come with me to register our marriage. My heart skipped a beat. Don't we already have the agreement? Not enough. His thumb brushed across my palm, a slow, deliberate caress. I want you rightfully, openly as my wife. Before dawn the next day, Kai dragged me to squat on the steps outside the Civil Affairs Bureau, the morning dew still clinging to the grass. He was uncharacteristically fidgety, checking and rechecking the documents in his pocket. When the doors finally opened, we were the first ones inside. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, took our papers with a cheerful smile. Congratulations, she said, her stamp hovering over the marriage certificate. Young people are always so eager. The thump of the red stamp was the most definitive sound I had ever heard. It was a period at the end of one sentence and the bold, opening line of another. As soon as the ink was dry, Kai's eyes reddened. He pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my hair. Elena. His voice was muffled, thick with emotion. The dream's real now. He held me so tightly I could barely breathe. What I owed you last life, I'll repay with interest this time. I pinched the soft flesh at his waist, making him yelp. Who asked you to repay anything? This life is for us, not for debts. He laughed, a watery, joyful sound, and then right there in the middle of the bureau he swept me up and spun me in a circle. The clerk chuckled and even the other couples waiting smiled. Hey, what are you doing? I shrieked, laughing despite myself. The morning light streamed through the windows, brushing his eyebrows, making him look fresh and youthful. All the shadows of our past lives momentarily banished. Back home he plopped me onto the back seat of his bicycle. Come on, wife, he called out, his voice full of unchecked joy. Time to make chili sauce. The wheels rolled toward the rising sun and I wrapped my arms around his waist, pressing my face to his strong back. The wind whipped past us, carrying away the last remnants of fear. We were married. It was real. That evening I crouched at the stove in our new home, stirring the giant pot of chili sauce as it simmered, the rich, spicy fragrance filling the air. Kai had a cigarette dangling from his lips as he headed out to the small office we'd set up to file paperwork. Before leaving he turned back and grinned. Wait for me, wife. I laughed and cursed at him, then bent my head over the bubbling crimson pot, stirring with a long wooden ladle. The rhythm was meditative, a promise of a stable, prosperous future. The past was finally behind us. Suddenly there was a sharp crack from the back window. Before I could even turn around, a damp, chemical-smelling cloth was smothered over my nose and mouth. A strong arm locked around my waist. I struggled, clawing at the fabric, but a wave of dizziness overwhelmed me and the world swam into blackness. When my eyes fluttered open, my head was throbbing. I was on the floor of our inner room, my vision blurry. A twisted face loomed over me. David, if I can't have you, no one will. His eyes burned with a crazed, absolute hatred. He dragged me across the floor, my head slamming against the brick, sending stars across my vision. His distorted face came closer. He tore open my collar with one hand, panting as he forced himself down. You were mine last time. Kai is nothing. A poor soldier, that's all. I kicked up hard, aiming for his crotch, but he caught my leg and slapped me so hard my vision went white. He yanked at my waistband, his fingers bruising. This was it. The nightmare was repeating. But then the front door exploded inwards with a deafening crash. Police. Don't move. Kai was the first through the door, a fury unleashed. He kicked David straight off me, sending him flying across the room. In an instant, Kai had stripped off his jacket and wrapped it around me, his hands trembling so badly he couldn't fasten the buttons. It's okay. It's okay, he muttered over and over, clutching me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. I'm here. I'm here. David was pinned to the ground by other officers, but he was still howling, spitting venom. Kai, you'll die miserably. You hear me? Shut your mouth. Kai roared, wheeling around. He broke free from the officer holding him back and slammed his fist into David's face. The sound was sickening. That punch is for Elena. It took 2 men to drag him back. By then David's face was a bloody, unrecognizable mess. Kai crouched in front of me, his chest heaving. He so carefully wiped the tears and blood from my cheeks. His own knuckles were split open, dripping onto the floor. Wife. His voice was raw, almost broken. I was late. I shook my head, my own hands trembling as I reached out and clutched his bloodied fist. You came, I whispered. That's all that matters. The day David was formally taken away, the whole village was in an uproar. The truth about Clara's murder and his embezzlement had sealed his fate. That beast, murdering his own sister-in-law and child, serves him right. I stood at the edge of the crowd, Kai's arm a solid presence around my shoulders, as David was led away in cuffs. He suddenly lifted his head, his cloudy eyes boring into me from across the square. Elena. His voice rasped like a broken gong. If only I'd met you first. There's no if, I cut him off, my voice soft but carrying a finality that silenced the murmurs around us. No matter how many times life restarts, I will never choose you. For a moment I saw his face clearly, all the bitterness, the regret, the twisted love that had curdled into obsession. Maybe I really had owed him something in another life. A debt of pain. But now, watching him being led away to his end, I knew. The debt was paid. David thrashed wildly, the shackles clanging. Lies. It was always you. It was. Kai turned my face away, his thumb gently brushing away fresh tears I hadn't even realized were falling. Don't look, he murmured. Let's go home. I leaned my head against his shoulder, utterly drained. The chili sauce, I mumbled. It needs stirring. He kissed my forehead. I'll stir it. You rest. And so we went home. To our sauce, our life, our future. The blizzard of my past life had finally, completely ceased. Half a year after our chili factory officially opened, its sign a proud beacon on the edge of the village, Kai suddenly became secretive. I found him at the small desk in our home, bent over an old almanac, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. He circled a date with a red pen. This day, he announced, pulling me onto his lap. It has a red star for family blessings. Let's have our wedding then. I laughed. We're already married, you fool. We have the certificate. Not properly, he insisted, his eyes serious. Not with a celebration with the whole village with you in a red dress. I want to give you that memory. A happy one. So, on the day he circled, we had our wedding. The entire village came. Our workshop was draped in vibrant red silk, and 20 banquet tables filled the courtyard, laden with food and, of course, jars of our signature chili sauce. The air was thick with the smells of roasting meat, spices, and joyous noise. Auntie Liang, who had splashed me with dirty water what felt like a lifetime ago, brought over a wine cup, her wrinkled face stretched in an apologetic smile. Elena, I was blind before. Kai threw his arm around my shoulder, grinning. Eat, Auntie Liang, he said, his tone forgiving but firm. Try the wife's cooking. That night, after the last guest had been sent off, the new house was so quiet I could hear the frantic beating of my own heart. The red wedding candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the wall. Kai, for all his usual bravado, was suddenly shy. He fumbled around with the quilt, his ears turning scarlet as he laid it out on the floor. "I'll, sleep down here," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. I stared at him, disbelief turning into sheer fury. After everything? After 2 lifetimes? Kai. I hurled a pillow at his head. "We have the marriage certificate. The wedding's done, the whole village has celebrated, and you're telling me this now." He scrambled to catch the pillow, his eyes darting everywhere. I wasn't ready." "He wasn't ready?" I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Then I stomped to the bed, yanked a little booklet from under my pillow and smacked it down in front of him. It was the newlywed handbook I'd found hidden among his things. "Kai," I said, my voice dangerously sweet. "Whose is this? And why, pray tell, is the corner of page 18 folded?" His eyes widened in horror. "Elena Shaw. Who told you to go through my stuff?" He lunged to snatch it from me, but I darted away nimbly. He was faster though. He caught me around the waist and pressed me down onto the soft quilt of the marriage bed, his body covering mine. His breath seared against my neck and shoulder, hot and ticklish. "Are you sure?" he whispered, his voice husky. "Sure about what?" I pretended not to understand, my heart hammering against his. "Sure you're not a coward?" His eyes darkened, the playful glint replaced by a smoldering intensity. He lowered his head and nipped my earlobe, sending a jolt straight through me. "You asked for this." The red candle flickered, and the 2 shadows on the wall finally, completely merged into one. 3 years later, the billboard for Elena's Fiery Sauce towered over the provincial train station. Our small workshop was now a full-fledged factory. Reporters crowded into our facility, microphones outstretched. "Director Elena, may I ask how you grew from a small workshop into sales of over 1 million jars a year?" Before I could give my practiced answer about quality and perseverance, Kai shoved his way into the frame, waving our marriage certificate at the cameras. "The secret," he declared, beaming. "Marrying a lucky wife, of course." I stomped hard on his army boots. He bared his teeth in a grimace of pain, but the grin never left his face. "See," he said to the laughing reporters. "With a fierce wife at home, how could I dare not succeed?" I pinched his waist viciously, but he only took the chance to wrap his arm around me, pulling me close. Facing the cameras, he declared shamelessly, "Honestly, my wife's chili sauce is so good. Even her farts smell fragrant." "Kai!" I shrieked, snatching up a basket of fresh chilies ready to clobber him. He ducked away, laughing, hiding behind the startled reporters. The Elena Shaw who starved to death in her past life was now the chili queen. Her name and face splashed across newspaper headlines. The irony was not lost on me. It was a sweetness more profound than any victory. That night at the celebration banquet, Kai, red-faced from drinking, cornered me between the high warehouse shelves, the air thick with the scent of oak barrels and spices. "Wife?" he murmured, his nose brushing my ear, making me shiver. "Do you know what our most successful product is?" Before I could answer, before I could list our best-selling sauces, he scooped me up and sat me down on a sack of soft, dried chilies. His hand slid from my waist to rest gently, possessively on my belly. "Our little chili pepper," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I bit his shoulder, my own eyes filling with tears of joy. "You've had too much to drink. You'd better work twice as hard." His breathing grew heavy, his hands gripping my hips. The wooden shelves rattled gently with our movement. Footsteps suddenly echoed on the concrete outside. A flashlight beam swept past the crack in the door. "Who's in there?" a voice called out. Kai pressed my head against his chest, stifling my gasp. His voice, when he answered, was remarkably steady. "Factory inspection," he called back. "We're checking chili quality." The footsteps faded. I shook with suppressed laughter, burying my face in his neck. Moonlight poured through the high window, shining on the piles of fiery red chilies, their color as vibrant and life-affirming as the sunset by the little river on the day he had carried me across. I wore a bright red padded coat on purpose the day I went to see him. The visiting room of the detention center was cold and gray, but my coat was a splash of defiant color. David Lee shuffled out, his back bent, his hair shockingly white. Only half a year had passed, but he looked like he had aged 20. The fire of madness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a hollow emptiness. "Come to laugh at me?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. I didn't answer. Instead, I shoved a small jar of our premium chili sauce across the table between us. "Try it. It used to be your favorite." He stared at the bright red sauce inside the glass jar, his hands, now frail and spotted, trembling slightly. Then he suddenly laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "Elena Shaw, what else do you know?" "Plenty," I said, my voice calm. I slowly unscrewed the lid, releasing the familiar, spicy aroma into the sterile air. "Like how Clara was reborn too." His head jerked up. "And that the child you killed," I continued, my gaze unwavering, "he was your brother's. His true, legitimate heir." "Impossible," he whispered, but the doubt was a worm in his eyes. "David," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Reborn or not, no one would ever choose to spend another life with you. Your brother still died in this life. And that man with the scar, the one you let harass her. He forced her. You murdered a woman who had been violated and your own brother's only child to protect your pride." I stood up, looking down at the broken man. "David Chin, you are not a victim of fate. You are a sinner." At the door I glanced back. A dull thud echoed in the quiet room. He was slumped against the cold metal table, his forehead pressed to its surface, his shoulders shaking violently. Not with rage, I realized, but with a grief so profound it had finally broken through his selfishness. 3 days later the phone rang. Kai's face darkened as he listened to the voice on the other end. When he hung up, he came to me where I was stirring a new batch of sauce. He caught my chili-stained hand in his palm warm and steadying. "He's gone, Elena," he said softly. "David killed himself in his cell." I froze for 2 seconds, the ladle still in my hand. The news settled inside me, not with joy, but with a quiet, definitive finality. The last ghost was laid to rest. "Oh," I said, my voice small. "It's over." He pulled me into his arms, holding me as I processed the end of a decades-long nightmare. "Tonight," he murmured into my hair, "we'll eat dumplings. I'll mince the filling for you." I nodded, leaning into his strength. Outside the factory window, the first snowflakes of the northern winter began to drift down, painting the world in a soft, clean white. The lights of our chili factory glowed warmly, a bastion against the cold. At last, the blizzard of my past life had completely ceased. The debt was paid in full. The day I found out I was pregnant, Kai was in the warehouse, high on a ladder, checking inventory on the top shelves. I walked over, the small white slip of paper with its life-changing result in my hand. He was so focused he didn't hear me approach. "Wife," he called out without looking down. "This batch of chili sauce has to be rushed out by Friday or—" He didn't finish his sentence. I smacked the test slip against his ankle. He squinted down at the paper for 3 full seconds. Then he froze as if struck by lightning. The clipboard in his hand clattered to the floor. Before I could even nod, he was down the ladder in a flash. He scooped me up and spun me around the warehouse 3 full times, his whoop of joy echoing off the high ceilings. In his exuberance, he kicked over an entire crate of our best bleeding heart sauce. Glass shattered and the heady, spicy scent flooded the air. "Kai." I yanked his ear. "That's money. Our money." "Who cares?" He laughed, the sound wild and free, tears of joy in the corners of his eyes. "I'm going to be a dad. I'm going to be a dad." By the next day, the whole village knew Kai had lost his mind. He went door to door, handing out a dozen bottles of our special reserve chili sauce to anyone who would take them, announcing to everyone he met, "My wife's pregnant. Take good care of her." Auntie Wong accepted a bottle and smirked. "Those who know realize it's Elena who's pregnant. Those who don't would think you're the one about to give birth." I stood in the courtyard, watching him blush crimson as the neighbors teased him mercilessly. The sight of him, so strong and yet so vulnerably happy, overwhelmed me. My nose suddenly stung and hot tears welled in my eyes. When Kai came running back, his smile vanished when he saw my tears. He panicked, his hands fluttering over me. "What's wrong? Where does it hurt? Is it the baby?" I shook my head, unable to speak, and buried my face against his chest, clutching the back of his shirt. "Elena, talk to me," he pleaded, his voice tight with fear. I took a shaky breath. "You gave away too much chili sauce," I mumbled into his shirt. We'll take a loss. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then he burst out laughing, a great rolling sound of pure relief and joy. He held me tight, his body shaking with it, and gently rubbed my belly that hadn't even begun to show. Worth it, he choked out between laughs. Every single jar. On the day I gave birth, the whole hospital could hear Kai's wailing. He was a wreck. Doctor. My wife's hands are cold. Nurse. She's sweating so much. Is that normal? Mom. Blana. Bite me if you need to, just hang on. After hours of agony, our daughter's fierce cry finally filled the delivery ward. The nurse came out holding a tiny, swaddled bundle. 6 pounds 8 ounces. Mother and daughter are safe. With a loud, undignified thud, Kai dropped to his knees right there on the linoleum floor, sobbing louder than the newborn. When they let him in, he stumbled to my bedside, tears streaming down his face. Wife, he gasped, clutching my hand. Let's never do this again. Lying weak and exhausted on the hospital bed, I watched him fumble with our daughter in his arms. He was so clumsy, so overwhelmed with awe and terror, his large hands seeming too big to hold something so small and perfect. My heart tightened, a familiar phantom pain as I remembered the child who had frozen to death in my last life, the son I never got to hold like this. Kai, I whispered. He rushed over immediately, our daughter cradled carefully in one arm, his free hand brushing the hair from my damp forehead. What is it? Are you in pain? Do you need water? I took his hand, the one that had wielded an axe, and wiped my tears, and pressed it gently against our daughter's tiny wrinkled cheek. This time, I said, my voice thick with a love that spanned 2 lifetimes, let's raise her together. Sunlight poured through the hospital window, warming the newborn's skin, gilding Kai's tear-streaked face. It was a new dawn in truth. When our daughter Lien turned 5, she was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity. One afternoon, while rummaging for hidden candy, she dragged a yellowed, wrinkled piece of paper from the bottom of an old trunk. Mommy, what's this? She asked, waving the sheet, her little braids bouncing. I was busy seasoning a new batch of spicy crawfish sauce, my hands covered in red paste. One glance at the familiar crooked handwriting made me nearly spill the entire spice jar. It was the fake marriage agreement. Only now I saw that on the back, another line had been scribbled in the same cramped hand, the ink a fresher, darker black. Final clause. Elena Shaw has the right to regret forever, but Kai will never agree. The date at the bottom was the day we had gotten our marriage certificate at the Civil Affairs Bureau all those years ago. Your dad's handwriting is still awful, I said, my voice catching. I pinched the bridge of my nose, laughing even as my eyes burned hot. Just then Kai walked in, 2 heavy boxes of dried peppers balanced on his shoulders. He saw the paper in Lien's hands and his eyes widened in comic panic. He dropped the boxes with a thud and rushed over. Little rascal. Don't touch Daddy's lifeline. Lien giggled, a mischievous echo of his own laugh, and ran around the room, the precious agreement fluttering in her hand like a flag. He chased her a couple of steps, his protests half-hearted, before he suddenly gave up. He turned and pulled me into his arms, his body warm and solid against mine, smelling of peppers and sunshine. What are you looking at? He whispered, his lips against my hair. I held up the paper, pointing to the final clause. It's in black and white, I said, teasing. You can never take it back. The rich, spicy fragrance of simmering chili filled the air around us, the scent of our life, our struggle, our victory. I stood on tiptoe and nipped his chin. Who said I wanted to take it back? He lowered his head and kissed me, his lips soft and familiar, his stubble scratching my skin until I laughed against his mouth. Our daughter covered her eyes, peeking at us through her tiny fingers. Sunlight streamed through the glass windows of the factory office, landing on the paper that had carried the weight of 2 lifetimes. The old oil stains from our first meals together overlapped with the fresh, permanent ink of his final promise, just like our life together. Stumbling, imperfect, scarred, but fiercely, joyfully, and finally completely whole. The end.